Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. I recently interviewed Radnor Commissioner Don Curley about the current and future status of the Willows, more specifically, the Willows Mansion, a stately 100-year-old building perched on a knoll in the Willows Park, one of the several beautiful recreational areas owned and operated, maintained by Radnor Township for the enjoyment of its residents for public use. The issue was a proposal under consideration by the Board of Commissioners to lease the mansion to a private nursery school, spawned by the debate over the proposal to lease the mansion to a private enterprise. An advocacy group of concerned residents led by Sara Pilling convened to discuss alternative uses for the mansion, to which Sara has a special attachment. Sara's grandfather, Charles Baron Keene, was the architect of the building when it was built in 1910 for John Sinnott and his California bride. The township bought the 47-acre property in 1973 for public use, underscore for public use. In recent years, because of the expense of maintaining the property, commissioners have entertained a variety of different proposals to put the building to use in many different ways. My guests today, Sara Pilling and illustrator Rick Leonardi, are developing one proposal that seems to be gathering some momentum. Some genuine interest among a number of people who would like to preserve, at least conceptually, the spirit, the beauty of the property. Sara, welcome to 30 Minutes.
Thank you for having us.
Rick, pleasure to see you here as well. First, let's establish who you are, Sara, and why you feel so passionately about this particular property, other than the fact that you have a relationship through your lineage with the property.
Well, I'm Sara Pilling. I live in Garrett Hill, where I have lived for the last 34 years. And because I feel so strongly about justice, not only my own life, but in the world, I started attending township meetings 18 years ago.
God bless you.
The more argumentative it gets, the faster I knit. And so I've become sort of an activist or where I see there's injustice or where people aren't allowed to speak their truth. And there is the fact that the building was designed by my grandfather, Charles Barton Keene, although I never knew him. He died 6 years before I was born. And I'm there all the time now because of the Skunk Hollow Community Garden, which is right next door.
You'll have to tell us about that as well. But Rick, you're an illustrator.
Yes.
You were a resident of Radnor Township?
Radnor Township, yes.
How did you get involved with this Don Quixote over here?
Well, I've seen her in action often at the township, and I think we just got together and I started to take what amounts to sort of pictorial dictation. We were just brainstorming, and I do my brainstorming in the form of sketch drawings.
Right.
And before we knew it, we had what we thought was a really bold, far better idea for the Willows than what had to that point been proposed. And now, unfortunately, I'm kind of invested in the process, so here I am.
Well, we're all glad for it. But had you known Sara before?
We've tilted at a lot of the same windmills to carry the Don Quixote metaphor too far.
Sara, at the commissioners' meeting the other evening, there was near unanimity among the commissioners that they do not want to sell the property, although that proposal was on the table to possibly get a broker to find someone who would purchase or lease the property. With public use an important part of that proposition, but nonetheless, in the discussion it seemed to become almost secondary. Public use is important, but there may be other issues that take more paramount. Namely, let's get this monkey off our back.
Exactly.
Because of the expense, a legitimate concern.
Yes.
They would prefer to lease the property, again, with a strong provision. Thank goodness for at least the one commissioner who spoke up and said, I don't want to let this property go. It was to her credit.
Yes.
So she prevailed in her recommendation that the board draft another request for proposal, RFP, to go out to the community and solicit recommendations, proposals about other possible uses. Again, keeping in mind that public use is very important. Access to the park. It was purchased for public use, purchased for the community, will remain therefore accessible by the community. So that seemed to be an important issue, at least at that meeting. there have been so many other options. You're much more familiar with them than I. But which of the various options that have been discussed, have been considered, many of which have been rejected, are you in favor of today?
Well, I was in favor of one particular caterer because I felt he had a global feel, but because it's owned by the township and the township didn't want to put any money in it, he couldn't get the private funding, which led me to lead to what I see as a vision. It's an old house. It was built in 1910. It's a very tired house. It is, I've discovered, having gone through it with an architect, it's really no longer the house that Charles Barton Keene designed. And the essential part of it is the view shed, the beautiful, beautiful overlook.
It is spectacular.
And the original house was designed so the whole back of the house, there were two gazebos that were covered with pillars, and I just can envision them there in a summer evening sitting out on there overlooking the pond and the fields and the animals that go through, and the old carriage house, which is called the cottage. So I began to think, what is the best? And the best of it is the view shed. So thinking outside the box, which I do, I thought this tired old building, which has nothing of what it was in 1910, and the Zanzingers had a right to change it to their needs, really should come down, keeping the essential parts and perhaps reconstructing with some of what was the essence of it, which was the back of the building and the terrace overlooking the pond and the trees and the fields and the cottage. So I've dared to put that forward. There's a lot of pushback, Rick. What do you mean? I went to a wedding there, or I had my daughter's rehearsal dinner there, or my child signed his yearbook there. But the township can't keep it up. It's going to be extraordinarily expensive to restore it. So let's do something different.
I think part of the allure up to now, anyway, at least in the short time that I have become aware of it and tried to get some additional knowledge or background, is the name, the phrase, the Willows Mansion. You've made the point. It is not. It was not built as a mansion. It was never intended to be a mansion. Therefore, it's just a building.
Well, Charles Barton Keene did a lot of what he called the country house. Now, some of them were quite large. Think of Renolda in Winston-Salem that was built for the Catherine R.J. Reynolds' wife. It's big, but you know what? It's in the cottage style. And a lot of the houses he did in Overbrook Park, they're in the cottage style. That's what the people wanted. He mostly met these people playing golf or sailing. He was quite the sportsman. And he built what they wanted, not a mansion. I think of Trumbauer when I think of mansions. And that's not what John Sinnott wanted. You think, she came from California in 1910. She didn't climb on a plane. And there wasn't a train all the way across the country. It was quite an adventure to get to Philadelphia. And Charles Barton Keene designed the house so she, coming from California, would feel comfortable in a house that had some of what I would call the California feeling. Witness the gazebo, the terraces.
Was it a primary residence or was it a summer home?
It was their primary residence, yes. You were going to add something, Rick.
No, I think, and unfortunately, what's essential in that whole story is how little of that original spirit and that original building and those original details exist to this day. The building has been so altered and so changed that to try and recreate that or God forbid restore it to its original condition, I think is prohibitively expensive.
I was there not too long ago for an art exhibit. And it was really sad to walk through the main floor of that building, to imagine what it was, and then because of modifications, some jerry-rigging here and there, to see it's kind of a hodgepodge now. That was done to accommodate wedding receptions and other public affairs there when the property was leased out for events.
It's very tired and it's
very
rather
tired.
shabby.
I agree with you. And the exterior, the entrance, it's
totally changed.
But, of course, what remains is what was fundamentally important about it, what the original inspired choice of the site.
Yes.
Yes.
It's the view from the house that
Okay.
is,
So,
at
so
the
let's,
end of the day,
let's
worth
pull the curtain
preserving.
back now.
Yeah.
So what do you envision? What do you both envision? You've done a rendering of what you
Yeah,
envision.
well, the drawing was the result of Sara and I and some other people just sort of sitting around talking about the various ideas, and you see this concept adopted in other places, and it
Mhm.
works.
The
Obviously,
rendering is up on the screen. Can you walk us through it?
sure. What you see in the picture, the sort of T-shape, the tan outline, is the existing footprint of the house. What's in white are the various structural elements of the house that I, being a comic book illustrator, I'm not a landscape architect by any sense, or an architect of any sort in any sense. But if you were to remove those elements that aren't true to the original,
Yes.
and preserve those elements that I think are structurally important and evocative of the original shell of the house, at least from a distance, and as well those elements that would best survive in outdoors, basically as sculptural elements out in the weather, and that's what's shown on the drawing in white anyway. Strengthen them, find ways to stabilize them, and find ways to make that a kind of walk-through environment for people. I think you got a winning project.
So it's kind of an abstract replication of the
Right.
footprint of the.
You think about most people who use the park. I mean, I think for most people, the Willows, to be perfectly honest, is sort of a backdrop. It could be a painting. It's that house up on the hill
Yes.
below which we have our activities. And to the extent that we preserve enough of the Willows that memory still kind of
Yes.
lingers, that effect of the backdrop still exists, I think that's. I think you could. It's a case of giving those people who have a sentimental attachment to the house something to cling to, something to carry away with them. Obviously, the simplest thing would be to just blade the whole thing over and drop a load of gravel. If you really wanted to splurge, you could have a park bench and some picnic tables.
Yeah.
And you'd have essentially a scenic vista like you see off the side of a highway.
A forfeited opportunity.
Yeah.
Sarah, you've referred to the Willows Park as a humming space. I've heard you use that phrase. What does that mean? You spend a lot of time.
I spend a lot of time, particularly in the growing season. There are people down at the pond fishing. There are kids mucking around the mud. There are families picnicking. There are walkers. There are dogs. There are orienteering. There are scouts going by. It's just amazing. I think Don Curley actually put it best. He sought me out in the garden on Tuesday, and it was election day. His kids had the day off. And he said, this is the one park where I can bring my kids and they can do whatever they want or nothing. There's no program.
Yes.
And that really struck me that that this is like the old time parks when I was a kid.
Yes.
And you found a log and you walked across it, or you made believe, you pretended, you dreamt. And I think that's why I really want to keep, as Rick says, keep the feeling of the mansion by keeping elements of it that are low maintenance and have it be the backdrop and have these people. But to do that, it has to be public use only.
Yes.
A commercial use or a private use
Hate to see that
denies that backdrop.
Yes, it becomes secondary.
Yes.
It would become secondary.
Yes.
You're asking people to imagine, with your help of your rendering, what this might look like. But there are other models that people can go to, places they can to see what it might look like, get a feel. Is Chanticleer the closest
Yes.
Oh yeah.
to
Both-
what you envision?
Both geographically and in concept,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. But Chanticleer was a house that was taken down, and then a new house, a sort of smaller, half-scale play ruin was kind of built in its place. to host a lot of plant life and the sort of flora that they specialize in. It's beautiful. It's a lot of fun. I would like to see what would happen if that kind of expertise and that kind of knowledge that those guys have brought to bear on Chanticleer were able to be applied to parts of the willows that remain. See if you could take that kind of that precious private experience into a public setting. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Sarah, you've been down this road before, more than once. You founded the Friends of the Cottage at the Willows?
I was one of the founders. We sort of backed into that.
Yeah.
We went to a commissioners meeting one evening, and there was an item under Parks and Rec that said request for $35,000. I mean, I knew the cottage was there, but
it was a shambles.
Well, it was a shambles, so they get to that agenda item, and Tom Blomstrom, who was head of Parks at that time, wanted $35,000 to tear down the building. So Ted Pollard gets up and says, "What do you mean you're going to tear that down?" It was then 98 years old. That's 98 years old. And Beverly Barnes, who was with Delaware County Planning, I forget exactly, but she said, "What do you mean?" And I got up and said, "What do you mean you're going to tear that down? My grandfather designed that." And we worked to save it. Sadly, it shuttered again, and they got a grant for $250,000 from the state to put in geothermal heating and new windows
Is
and
that
everything.
Really?
Yeah, and now the township's talking again of tearing it down.
Why?
Because a group never grabbed it.
Well, there was a group that was using it for to sell produce
For the
and whatnot.
CSA.
Right.
And that was the year my daughter died. And I just sort of dropped away from the earth. There were a couple of issues. They weren't running it, and that I understand. They established
just using the
CSA.
garage, I think, weren't
Well,
they?
they were using the CSA where we now have the
Okay.
garden. There'd been a lot of pushback that you're going to be selling against the Wayne Farmers Market,
I
which is
remember
a
that. I
sentimental
do
thing.
remember that, yes.
And the people who were operating the CSA were bringing in milk and eggs and chicken and cheese.
It didn't
and-
last long, I
And
remember
they
that.
didn't have a vendor's license.
Yes.
Oh dear.
Yep.
So because they didn't follow the guidelines, and the
Yes.
first year they got the potato virus, so that meant no tomatoes, no peppers, no eggplants. It was a lot of greens for $800 a share.
There's got to be some use for that building,
Well,
particularly since it's been renovated.
It takes a group
Okay.
to come in. I think they hoped the Boy Scouts would come in there, but they had the old school
Yes.
down at Ardrossan.
And 2 acres
And I
now,
think
or I
they,
think?
yeah, 2 acres. And I think they really hoped the Radnor Conservancy would move there
But,
because they put a lot of money in it.
yes. All right. So that one's not over.
No, that's another battle for another day.
Okay.
I think
Although in some senses
You had a
it's
great
well,
idea.
in some sense it's an allied thing. The other thing to remember about the Willows is it sits on that knoll, but it sits in front of many acres of woodland
Yes.
through which trails run. People are up there all the time, running and walking and walking their
Biking.
dogs and biking and all that kind of stuff. And those people who have tried those trails, have been up on those trails, know that you park your car. If you're extremely keen-eyed, you can see the tiny brown sign with a little logo of a hiking man on it that indicates the trailhead. That ought to be a grand thing. The trailhead to that system ought to be a big deal, and it ought to leave from the Willows Mansion.
I always have a problem with trails because they're built for township residents, Radnor residents,
Right.
but they attract people from outside of the township.
yes, all
Which
the
means,
time.
yeah, exactly, which means they take the parking spaces, which is always limited, take the parking spaces and otherwise build the traffic on the trails. I'm not sure how you monitor that. Do you issue permits, little badges? You have to police it, and if you do, that's more expense.
That's-
Well, which brings the discussion back to the cottage. What you need in that case, what you really ought to have, is a sort of headquarters building for the trail system, sort of like the Appalachian Mountain Club's headquarters in Pinkham Notch, or something along those lines. A place where you park your car, you get out, you get your trail map, you sign in, you know, use
go
the
to the
facilities,
bathroom
use the
before
facilities
you
one
go.
last
Yes.
time, maybe buy a cup of coffee. Maybe there's a coffee shop in there.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a bike rental in there. You know, and that's where you start. That's where you start the kind of the paperwork part of your experience in the
Right.
park. And then you wander up the roadway, and at the Willows, that's where the magic starts, because that's where you enter the
You
forest.
really are invested in this, aren't you? That's
A good idea is its
Yeah,
own
yeah, yeah,
reward.
yeah. There was, as I recall at the commissioners' meeting, there was an issue, some concern raised that if the site were developed as you are proposing and becomes a destination, therefore, that there would have to be a custodian, there might have to be guides, there might have to be additional staff to take care of it, et cetera, et cetera. What's your response to that?
Well, as far as the space at the top of the knoll, I'm not
Right.
going to talk about where the mansion is
No,
because
yes, the space.
I see it as a truly public space. I was thinking the other night, you have an online calendar that the township
Right.
has. You want to take your yoga class up there at 8 o'clock on Wednesday
Uh-huh.
morning. You go online, you sign it up for it, you take your own mats. I see in its simplest form, yes, if you were having a party there, there might be an issue, but it's mostly sweeping, police checking to make sure it's not being vandalized,
Yes.
the grass cut. I see it.
Well,
I
taking
don't
care
think
of
you.
restrooms, I think there would be restrooms.
But they have to do that now.
Oh, you have to
or
do
Mr.
something
Porta
about
Potty
that porta
does.
potty. That is, what an eyesore that is.
Well, don't get me on that because
Okay,
the garden,
I
the
won't.
garden offered, and the scouts were ready
To dress it up
build
a little bit?
to build a composting toilet facility near the garden. But we were told that it wouldn't be fancy
You're right.
enough.
That's another show. I'm not going to get you off
Don't
that.
get me on that.
No.
But I see it as very low maintenance, and we have no kitchen in this new building because people are using food trucks. Imagine
Yes.
going to a party and 4 different
Sure.
food trucks.
Well, you had mentioned it, or somewhere there was some reference to a pavilion of some kind, a sheltered space. I
that's-
didn't see it in the rendering. though.
Well, it's very lightly sketched in. My concept, again, just
Right.
spitballing here with no particular expertise, is you can see off to the left of your screen, I suppose
Yeah.
it is, the footprint of what is now the office and kitchen wing. My idea is to keep the first 2 feet of that wall
Right.
as a sitting wall, basically.
Okay.
And if you want to erect a pavilion, you can just make out the lines. A roof on poles,
Yeah, that
basically,
would be it.
such as you find
Yeah.
at Fenimore Park,
Now,
for example.
What's at the head? What's at the top of that rendering?
Oh, that
It-
you have
what
the
is that
front
now?
door, and then you have the fresco
So
on the
that's
other
the
side.
entrance. That's the
Right.
main entrance.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
So there's a forecourt right in front of the front door of the house.
Uh-huh.
So you keep the front facade, which you can
Right.
see there, and across that forecourt, at the very top of your picture, is I don't know what that is.
It's the original.
But
element.
it's emblematic,
Emblematic of the
it's what
property.
everybody recognizes first off about the Willows. It's a wall. It's got niches in it. It's got one central niche with a dolphin fountain in it.
Do you keep some of the fireplaces and chimneys?
Well, the chimneys,
Or are they on the interior?
in my
so it'd be
experience,
hard?
the chimney stacks are usually the things that are the last to fall in when a
Yeah,
building
true.
goes. 300 years later. That's the chimney stack that's still
I've
standing.
been watching too much television.
And the fireplaces are not original.
Oh.
They were replaced.
So they and various wall elements could be stabilized and could serve as anchors for an overhead retrofitted trellis, for
This
example.
all sounds wonderful, but let me go to the hard question, the one that was put to you, as a matter of fact,
Right.
by the commissioners. What makes you so sure you can raise money, any money, but particularly the kind of money we're talking about here, to execute, implement your plan? And I think part of your response was based on your experience with Friends of the Cottage. So can you tell us about that success
Well-
and how you hope to take what you learned there and apply it to this situation?
We had a wonderful leader of the Friends of the Willows Cottage, Mark Janicek, who's a builder. I'll tell you, he could sell igloos to Eskimos. There were a lot of architects, well drillers who stepped forward and volunteered because they didn't want to see this building torn down. I'm not quite sure I understand it, but Rich Booker at the last commissioners meeting raised the issue about how it was so difficult to raise money in Radnor
Yes.
Township. Have they asked? We already have one group of a community who are very committed to this, and one of the members has asked to be the chief fundraiser.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Sure. What's the magnitude of the raise? How much would you
Well,
have to raise?
they quoted on Monday night $150,000 to take it down.
And how much to put it back up?
Twice that much?
Well, I would imagine that's your floor, though. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
the cheapest way out would be to, as I say, blade it off, $150,000. Now, you know, over and above that, how high can we go?
Well, that's
I
right.
don't know.
I think, I'm guessing, this is purely guessing, that, and I'd rather say 500,000 than a half a million.
Yeah.
I think we could raise it, and I would want to
If you say
investigate.
half a million, it sounds like a mansion. If you say 500,000, it sounds like a home.
Right,
Right.
right.
Words have
It's,
meaning.
I mean, we don't know that. We haven't gotten that far, but we're sort of like a snowball rolling downhill. We are beginning to gather other people who are coming in and going, you know, that's not a bad idea.
Yes.
And we are going to have our next meeting is going to be on the 18th of May. It will be televised
Your
at
next
the
meeting
township.
of this advocacy group?
Of the big
is-
group.
Is there a name for it? Have you put it? Is it Friends of the Willows?
No.
No, not going to do a Friends group again?
No name yet,
No
Sarah.
name
No,
yet,
you need
so
a
that's
name.
what we need to. Well,
Yes.
Don Curley is calling it the postmodern reconstruction.
Oh, good
Yes.
grief.
Yes.
Oh, good grief! It's a lot of words, but it hides the word demolish.
Yeah.
Right.
We're in the very beginning, but my grandmother always said, "Nothing ventured, nothing gained."
she was
if you
absolutely
don't
right.
try, you'll never know.
Sarah, I live in an entrepreneurial world. I spend a good bit of my time dealing with entrepreneurs, early stage ventures, dreamers, who are fanatical about their causes and don't want to hear all the reasons it can't be done, couldn't be done, and so on. So I completely understand what you're talking about. This is doable. It's just a matter of finding out how best to get it done.
Well, and it's worth, at the risk of bringing up a sore subject, it's worth pointing out, I think, that, that if a venture of this sort is properly explained to Radnor residents and they get a feel for what it's actually going to cost and what they're going to get out of
Right.
it, that even by means of a bond issue,
Yes.
Radnor Township
Yes.
can step up. I mean, $11 million for a pasture. Hey.
Okay. Are there other groups like the Wayne Arts Center and you mentioned the Conservancy and so on? Are there others who are beginning to come into your circle and offer their support?
Well, I have talked to the Wayne Arts Center. They're in their own unique situation right now. I think they would use the space. I know the Historical Society really wants to restore it to its historicity and maintain it. If the township doesn't want to do anything with it, I don't know how that's going to happen. Of course, the school is still interested.
Yes. The school, the nursery
The
school?
nursery school from St. David's Church, they're still interested. There's some,
Which would
well, it
seriously,
it
yeah,
shuts,
it shuts it
shuts
down to
it
public
off.
use, yes.
it really
Effectively.
does. Effectively.
Right.
And space around it.
Yes. And the traffic would be
Well,
horrendous.
I won't even go there.
It would be horrendous.
Well,
Traffic there in that
And
area
there's
is bad enough
talk
as it
about a
is.
cultural center, but that needs another building.
Yeah.
the thing to remember is that in the case of the nursery school or any kind of private venture, that view that we're talking about at the top of the program, you're not going to be able to walk up there and enjoy
No,
that view.
of course not. There'd
That's
be
somebody
security
else's,
issues.
it's somebody else's building,
Yeah.
particularly if it's a kindergarten.
Right.
Yeah.
Good luck.
There are bound to be security
Yeah.
issues. There would have to be.
Well, there are tiger moms
Oh, yes.
who
Yes.
watch for who's there,
Yes.
and in this day and age of people being so afraid of kids being
Regrettably,
snatched,
yes, you're right.
I
So-
don't believe any male would just take a walk.
So tell me again about the upcoming meeting on May the 18th,
May the
which will be
18th
held at
at
the
7
Radnor
o'clock.
Municipal Building.
At the building in the Radnorshire Room, and it will be filmed.
Okay. Anyone is
Anyone who
is
would like
interested
to
may
come, who's
attend?
interested in the building,
At 7 o'clock, did you say?
7
7 to
o'clock.
when?
8:30, quarter of
And
9,
the purpose of that meeting is,
to explore other ideas, to
other than the one we've been
other than
discussing?
ours.
Okay.
I know that Ted Pollard is very interested in this cultural center. I know the school is still interested. I know the real estate people are still interested in buying the building, et cetera.
Even though the township has made it clear we're not selling the building. I wish someone had really made that a declarative, unequivocal statement. We are not selling the building, period. Don't even bother asking.
I don't know what that's about.
Well-
and the piece of it is, Rick, that you mentioned for public use.
Yes.
They got that land. They did pay for it,
Yes.
but they got, we've
For
got
public use.
They condemned it for
Yeah.
public use. And they all admit they would have to go to orphans court to get that changed. And I don't think any resident of Radnor Township who likes that park would agree to the township.
Well, I
And
think,
it's worth
I
pointing
think-
out too, just to interrupt you, Rick, real quick, is that in relative to what I was just saying about the rye field, we've heard in our prior meeting, it was brought up, and I think it's true, that in terms of the willows, maintenance and upkeep of the willows has never actually been presented to the Radnor Township
Yeah.
in terms of
Yep.
a
Rick,
specific
I
explicit
apologize,
proposal.
I've got to wrap it up.
Okay.
Or they're going to cut me off. I do appreciate your being here. Thank you
We
very, very
appreciate
much.
coming.
And the residents of Radnor Township should be indebted to you for giving it so much time and effort and caring so much. So thank you.
We do.
Thank you very much. Rick?
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Oh, we used up
Until
that
next
time.
time, this is 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves.